Warmly welcome everyone to today's morning boost. Last time we talked about space and how to get to the space, to the moon. And today we are going to talk a little bit about well-being. The topic is how to boost your brain. And the best speaker of doing that is a serial entrepreneur, David Brudö, who actually, we talked a little bit this morning. He said, I feel a bit like at home in this area. You started in Chalmers School of Entrepreneurship here.
Correct.
And you started several companies. You're actually a serial entrepreneur, and you're one of the top 40 serial entrepreneurs under 40 in Sweden from Dagens Industri, or you were.
I'm actually past 40.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, I realized that too. But you have been, and that's...
I've been.
Yes.
Those were the days.
And WHO also say that in 2030, depression is going to be one of the biggest global diseases, or what do you call it?
The number one global burden of disease, and then we've had this little thing called a pandemic, which probably has accelerated this quite a bit.
A little bit. I think we're going to hear more about that. So we're looking forward to hear you tell about your story a little bit, and also about Remente, that's your company for now, and that's where you're working with also well-being. Maybe some of you are using this app already. If not, you're going to do it after today, I think. So warmly welcome, David. We're looking forward to listen to you about 25 minutes, and then we're going to have some questions for you who want to, and we're going to end shortly before 9. Warmly welcome, David.
Thank you so much. So, pleasure to be here today. I'm David. Can you hear me well? Awesome. Yeah. So actually, my entrepreneurial journey started in this very building at the top floor here at the Chalmers School of Entrepreneurship, some plus 15 years ago. Since then, I've been habitual entrepreneur, I guess, starting different kind of startups, businesses ranging from e-commerce to nanotechnology and ultimately mobile apps. And this is basically what I want to do. When I originally studied commercial law, so I have a law degree, but fortunately I realized that entrepreneurship was much more fun. But entrepreneurship is also tough, like many other things in life, and one of the outcomes of me being an entrepreneur was actually burning out. I basically learned the hard way that I had a brain that I didn't really take care of. So what I was doing, I was running a mental marathon, but I hadn't prepared for it. So you can imagine the outcome. Not so good. So basically, what happened is that the Remente that I work with today, it's an app for individuals and businesses to help them improve their mental health and performance. So that's basically the brainchild of my burnout, because this was some 10 years ago. What I realized back then, that the topic of mental health wasn't as addressed as it is nowadays. It's still stigmatic, but it was even more so. Specifically as an entrepreneur, you're not talking about how you feel mentally, because you're just supposed to, be a superman or woman, work around the clock to make your business successful against odds. No one was talking about how they were feeling mentally and how that affected them. But I had to learn that the hard way. And when I came in touch with the mental health system and healthcare system, I realized that all the efforts we take related to our mental health and well-being are more or less focused on healthcare. And you bring in healthcare when things have gone too far. Like when you have a burnout, stress, or depression, that's when you start to look for help. Which is kind of odd in a way. If we look at our physical health, we're really preventive there. But mentally, I was a textbook example, running a mental marathon without having prepared for it. And the outcome wasn't that good. So I started Remente with some other great minds with a mission to democratize mental well-being. And so far, we have tested our app on around 2 million people across the globe. And we have been struggling throughout the years because the topic of mental health, I would say, would you consider it a trendy topic today? Yeah. I would say before the pandemic, not so much. So it's been really an uphill battle for around 8 years, I would say. So it's really been a testament of grit, saying that, okay, this is a really important topic. I will go into this a bit. But it's so abstract, so many people cannot relate to mental health issues and conditions unless they're suffering from them themselves. So that's what we want to change. So, the pandemic, anyone have experienced it in the past year or two? Some major changes in life? Yeah? So, we have an obvious pandemic that's been going on for the past 2 years, the COVID-19 pandemic. And then we have the more silent one, which I've been a little bit addressing. So currently we have about 1 million Swedes that are suffering from some kind of mental health conditions. We have just as many Swedes that are taking some kind of antidepressants. And statistically, so you're about distributed 50-50 in the audience today. So about half of you will suffer from a mental health condition during your lifetime. Congratulations to one side of you. I don't know which is which here. So this is really a topic that affects all of us, whether we want it or not. And what I found was somewhat ironic is that it's given how this topic is really affecting us and our well-being and health and our performance, and we're not really talking about it. So what do you think is the number one cause to sick leave? Great question. Yeah, mental health condition is the number one cause to sick leave. If you think about that, and if you look at the cost of mental health issues globally, it costs about $2.5 trillion annually. This is the cost of mental health conditions to society. Okay, it's a big number. Maybe it doesn't say that much, but to give a little bit of perspective, so mental health issues cost society more than cancer, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes put together. And how much money do you think is going into research and funding and studies and efforts to combat this? Only a fraction of the cost that is spent on these other diseases. So we have some things to work here. And then we have a couple of other factors to take in mind as well. So being a human today is not super easy always. So we have this little thing called the global pandemic. Apart from that, we have an environment that isn't going super well, maybe. We have some challenges there as well. And we also live in an information society, which basically our brain wasn't designed for. So what scientists are starting to see today is that grown-ups can develop ADHD or ADHD-like symptoms because it's so tough for us to focus, because devices like this and this is constantly craving for our attention. And our brain wasn't designed to have these many distractions. So the ability for us to focus is actually deteriorating, which is kind of an irony. So I looked at a study where they were looking at the kind of tools we have at work for our productivity. So the number of tools that we have to help us support and be more productive at work is looking like this. So we have more and more tools and systems and processes to be more productive at work. How do you think productivity at work is going at the same time? Is that also following this line? No, it's going like this. So we have more tools and systems than ever to be productive and efficient, but we are all less productive and efficient than ever. And as I mentioned, mental health today, mental health issues is the number one cause to sick leave. And all these factors that I'm showing here are somewhat connected. So, how have you felt that the pandemic that we've been facing and in some ways still are, how has that affected your mental health, you would say? Has it affected it at all, or negatively, or good? So if you raise your hand, if you feel that this has had a negative effect on your mental health, you could raise your hand. A neutral effect? No. A good effect? That was some. So it's a mixed bag. Very, very interesting, but what we can say is that all of us has been, most of us at least, have been affected in some way. And they recently did a study in US showing that about half of US workers have seen negative mental health issues due to the pandemic. And this is kind of interesting because this goes back to how the brain works, which I will go into in a little bit. So the thing is that our brain, one of its primal survival mechanisms is its ability to be social, to belong to a group. So when we were living back in the day on the savannah, our way to survive was to belong to a group. With a group, we could find nutrition, we could find shelter, we could find protection. What happened if we were excluded from the group? That was like being sent to death. So that's why what they've seen, for instance, with teens that are excluded in social media are not developing their cognitive abilities as they should. So if you're excluded from social media, it's like being sent to death. Does that make sense? So what happens in a pandemic when we're suddenly isolated? We cannot meet people at work like we used to do, we cannot connect with loved ones, etc. It affects our mental health and our brain quite heavily. Another thing that the pandemic also brought is uncertainty. And this is something I will go into in a bit when I'm going to talk about a little bit of how the brain works. That's also something that the brain doesn't like. So when uncertainty appears, we easily go into stress and anxiety. So, what I wanted to do as a next step, I'm just going to jump here. Oh, before that, so I was into a little bit about entrepreneurship. So I was initially thinking, as entrepreneurs, you should be extra strong, and you have to, to me, entrepreneurship is like the extreme sports of business. It's like if you go into piss, that's like normal day job. If you want to go off piss, that's being an entrepreneur. A lot of a high degree of uncertainty, challenges, etc. And I figured, so entrepreneurs, how do we relate to mental health? So actually what is shown, a study that was made at Berkeley showed that if you're an entrepreneur, you're 50% more likely to report to have a mental health condition. Are there any entrepreneurs here today? Yeah, a couple of you. Congratulations! So you're twice as likely to suffer from depression, 6 times as likely to suffer from AD, 3 times as likely to suffer from substance abuse. So good luck with your entrepreneurial career. But I think this is kind of interesting because these are topics that aren't generally addressed. And if you would go to your investors or your board of directors and tell them, well, I feel like shit, I'm super stressed, they would probably go, I'm not going to put money in you. But we still know that there are a number of super successful entrepreneurs that have quite severe mental health conditions. And maybe that's the reason why they became entrepreneurs. So there are different sides to this. But this is actually quite an interesting topic. So this is a big issue in society, but specifically for entrepreneurs. So I think, for instance, when I went to Chalmers School of Entrepreneurship, which was really great for me, somewhere here in the building, no one talked about these issues. No one was addressing the kind of the mental stress that it is being running a business or even as an employee. And I think this should really be included in any kind of education today. Because you saw the statistics previously. Half of us will have some kind of mental health issue during our lifetime. So education, training should really prepare us for it. So, okay, a lot of bad news, a lot about talking about these issues, mental health and what that means, and the negative aspects of these issues in the society we live in. But what if there was a way to prevent this? So this is when I started Remente, this is what we started to look into. can we actually help people manage their mental health and well-being in a more sustainable and better way? And there actually is a way to do this. If we use our brain the right way, if we understand how our brain works. So this is a very crude schematic, a rough view of how you could look at the brain. So you could actually talk about that you might have two brains. So we have the thinking brain, and then we have, you could say, the emotional brain. So the thinking part of the brain, this is where we have our logic, our ability to have a vision, to plan things, to have goals, our reasoning. This is what we often think is running the show. Then we have our survival mechanism and the more emotional part of the brain. This part of the brain is about 2 million years old. The logical part of the brain is about 200,000 years old. So if you've ever been in a situation where you see a really nice box of chocolate and your thinking brain starts saying, well, I shouldn't really eat this, you know, it's not good for you, etc., etc. Have you ever been in that situation? And then there's another system just coming, overtaking, overriding your logical thinking about, you know, I can always, you know, do an extra workout, and you know, chocolate doesn't matter. I'm gonna watch this movie right now, I'm gonna have some sweets to that. Let's grab that chocolate. So this is an example of what I would call the battle of our two brains. The logical part and the emotional part. So you have one part of the brain which is about a couple of 100,000 years old versus a 2 million old part. Which will win, do you think? Yeah, the emotional part. And most people won't think about this. And you feel bad for yourself because like, oh, I have some bad character. I know I shouldn't, you know, sit in here eating chips, watching Netflix. I should be out jogging or meditating or doing something super healthy, but I'm not. Well, it's not that easy because, you know, you're competing against a 2 million old very, very strong system in your mind. But if you understand that this is the way it works, and I'll go through some boosts that can help you manage this later on, you can actually start working with the brain instead of against it. So the cool thing about the brain is if you understand how it works, you can actually make it work a lot better. And what we know about our brain today is it's plastic. Did you ever hear about that term? It's like, basically look at your brain as a muscle. If you work it, it will grow, it will become smarter and better. If you don't, it will deteriorate. It's kind of interesting because if we look at people that have been diagnosed with the burnout symptom and they've been facing stress a lot, so what you can see in their brain is that the part of the brain that is connected to stress is extra big. So the brain, in a way, is kind of intuitive. So if the brain sees that you are facing stress a lot, it will prioritize stress in the brain. So say, okay, you stress a lot, so we need to prioritize that function so you can stress more easily. It's actually logic, but it's not good for us. But it also goes the other way around. So this is the cool thing about the brain. So you can basically remodel and retrain your brain. I just recently learned about a super cool meditation exercise to help you improve focus. And this has been tested on children and adults with ADHD. And the only thing you do basically, because what we know is what controls your ability to focus is your dopamine level, and what controls your dopamine level is how often you're blinking. So when we get tired, we blink a lot, right? Like this. Because we're tired, we want to trigger dopamine in the brain to get energy. So what they found out is that you just sit for 70 minutes with closed eyes and you focus on your breathing. Kind of like a typical breathing exercise, breathing meditation. It will trigger the focus parts of your brain and build out the network circuitry of the brain that helps you focus better. And they see amazing effects of this. So if you can do that on a daily basis, you will see really great effects on your ability to focus and be more present. 17 minutes. Close your eyes, focus on your breathing. Try to remove all distractions and all the thoughts, typical meditation exercise. So it can be that simple to start working out with your brain and retraining it. So when we know more about how the brain works, it becomes easier to live, we become happier, we become less stressed. And I'm just going to go through some basics about the brain. So one thing that is super important for us is knowing where are we going? What's our mental direction in life? Some people are really great at this. Look at Elon Musk, for instance. He's already on his way to Mars. Do you think he would get there? Yeah. What makes him get there? His mind, and how he sets his mental barriers, which are far beyond everyone else. So our ability to set goals is something really, really important for us. It's evolutionary to us. We need to know where we're going and why, not only literally physically, but also mentally. This is also one of the answers to why the pandemic has been so tough on us, because it involves a big degree of uncertainty. So if we don't know mentally where we're heading, and when we set goals for ourselves, set the direction mentally, we talk to the prefrontal cortex of the brain. And this is also where we have the logic and our ability to plan and have visions. So this is super important to us, to know where we're going and why, mentally. Because if we look at the pandemic, we don't know when it really will end. We thought it would end 1 year ago. Now, hopefully it has ended. In Sweden, at least, it has ended. We don't have a pandemic anymore, right? No face masks or anything like that. But now we can read, okay, so in Great Britain, they're talking about a 5th wave, and there's some new COVID strain, etc., etc. So this creates uncertainty. And that's why we've seen that mental health issues have really gone up during the pandemic, because it creates uncertainty for people. People are losing their jobs, they're afraid of losing their jobs, they don't know when the pandemic will end. So the way to deal with this is try to set some kind of direction over things you can't control. Because when you don't know where you're heading and why, what will happen is that your brain will go into the fight and flight mode, basically, which is manage stress. So if we don't have a clear direction in our life, where we're heading and why that is important for us, we go into stress and anxiety. So the key here to manage this is to have formulate some kind of direction in your life. It doesn't need to be, 5-year plan, but just what's important for this week. At the end of this week on Friday, what's my intention? What would I like to feel like? How would my feeling, for me to feel that this was a good week, how would I like to feel? Okay, I have a feeling about that. Okay, what steps do I need to take to get there? And that's about connecting your direction to habits. When you do that, you talk to the reward system in the brain, the things we do on a daily basis. We have something called the limbic system. That's where we have memories. That's also where we have emotions. So, is there anyone here that remember 9/11? Yeah? Okay, so what's your name? Gunnar. So Gunnar, do you remember where you were when you heard about 9/11? Exactly, yeah. So, would you mind telling us?
I was at the golf course together with
Yeah. And this is kind of interesting. So when Gunnar can, very vividly recall a memory from 20 years ago. So Gunnar, what were you doing 2 weeks ago at this time? Do you know exactly where you were? No idea, yeah. So what I did now, I was speaking to the limbic system in Gunnar's brain. That's where we have emotions, that's where we have memories. This is what happened with people that are suffering from PTSD. Do you know what that is? Yeah. So basically, let's say that I would have been in a situation where I had been close to drowning. So for me, then it could be enough that I see water, or a little lake, or a puddle of water, to actually create anxiety within me. So my logical part of the brain understands that this doesn't make sense, but the emotional part of the brain is so much stronger. So it overrides us. But if we know this, we can actually work with these factors. If we know that we can use the logical part to help us set this direction and connect that to more emotional behaviors, it will reduce the likelihood of us getting into stress, anxiety, and mental health issues. Does this make sense? Yeah. And if it's like weird or complex, just let me know. So, with that said, I'd like to do a little exercise with you. So if all of you guys stand up. So, what I would like you to do now is that if you can be 2 and 2 or 3 and 3, and you stand in front of another person. What I want you to do now is that you are to greet this person, but there's one thing you need to think about. This is a person, so you're going to say hello to them, but this is a person you cannot trust. As soon as you turn your back on them, they will stab you. This is a really untrustworthy person. So with that in mind, I want you to say hello to this person as you're meeting them. Please do. Okay. That's good. So thank you very much. What I want you to do now is to imagine the same person in front of you that used to be a really untrustworthy person. Imagine now this is your long-lost friend that you haven't seen for 10 years, and you've shared so many memories together, and now you're seeing each other again for the first time in 10 years. How would you greet that person? Okay. Thank you very much, guys. A big applause to that. So basically, what changed here? Was there a difference in the greeting? Of course. There was, yeah. So why was there a difference?
Different feeling.
Different feeling, yeah. Anyone else? Trust, you felt trust. Great. Well, what this actually was our first boost of today, which is about changing our mind. So what really changed in this situation was that I told you so, right? I told you to shift mindset, and you did it like this. It's not always that easy, but sometimes it is. And this really shows how we can work with our mind, how we can prime our mind. And sometimes you need an external factor. You need to look at motivational quote or get some inspiration. You can just shift. And when it comes to mental health conditions, this is super important. So one of the biggest things is to break negative patterns, negative behaviors. And that's about shifting perspective. So this was a small exercise on how you could change your mind. I told you to do one thing and you did it, and then you did the complete opposite. Just because I told you. And I would presume that you could feel different kind of states when you did these two things, right? Yeah. Sometimes it's just that easy. So congratulations on learning your first boost today. I'm going to go through 4 boosts in total. This was the first one, so you're already 1/4 there. That's great. Well done. And now I have 3 more. So the second boost I want to go through with you guys is the 6 scientific steps that can help you relieve stress and reduce stress. And interestingly enough, when we're stressed, we are doing the exact opposite. So, if I would take myself, when now I feel I have a lot to do at work. So what do I tend to do then? Well, I sleep less because, I have to work around the clock. Exercise, forget about it because I don't have time for it. Social, relationships, meeting people, well, I don't have time for it, right? Taking breaks, what are you talking about? I have to work around the clock to meet this deadline. Being mindful, meditating, forget that. Having a direction, knowing where I'm going, oh, well, we'll take that later. One thing with Remente is we work with businesses to help them with their mental health and performance in the organization, which is it shows today that if you invest €1 in mental health efforts, you get 5 times an ROI. That's the great effect it has with employees. And often say, so we have some great time management tools that you could work with in your organization. And people are like, well, that's great, but I don't have time for it. This is a typical example again, battle of the brains. You know, we have a logical part that know what we should do, but then we have the big emotional part that's habitual. So our brain is designed to go with our old habits, regardless if they're good or bad, because the brain's designed to take the easiest route going forward. Because traditionally that was a good way to help us survive. Today, it's not always the case. So when we're stressed, to help us reduce stress, there are actually 6 scientific factors we can work with that would help us. So one is sleep, obviously. You've heard about this, I guess. I think they've shown that about, I don't know if there are 5 or 3% of the population that actually get on well with less than 6-7 hours of sleep. And often you hear Obama, he steps up, he went up at 4 in the morning, and Arnold Schwarzenegger, these guys. But have in mind, look at Obama. He had a whole, team of people taking care of things for him. Probably people helped him, put on his underwear. I don't know. But, the only thing, so looking at these examples of these super successful people who get up early every morning, I mean, that could be great, but, we need our sleep. It's super important. We have something called the circadian rhythm, and this is something that is really ancient and evolutionary, which we cannot, it's always there. And now what's really interesting is we know that light, our ability to see, daylight affects the circadian rhythm and our sleep, our energy, how we behave, etc. They've even seen this with people that are blind. They need to have light on a daily basis, so it's not about your ability to see or not, which is really cool. So we're learning a lot on how we can function in the best way. But sleep is super important, so that's something to prioritize. I don't think that you should think of that, I need to sleep 8 hours, and if I don't do that, it's bad. Me personally, I've been trying a lot of different apps, gadgets. I've been having wristbands that are tracking my sleep, and sometimes what I could feel is that actually that stresses me out more. Because okay, I only got 7.3 hours of sleep last night, I should have had 8, damn it, I suck. Well, it's not really like that. You feel yourself what works and what doesn't, but sleep is one of the, I would say probably the #1 factor that could help influence your well-being. Second thing, exercise. You probably heard it as well. The effects of the brain when you continuously exercise. I think what they've seen, if you 3 to 5 times a week exercise for at least 30 minutes at 70% of your max pulse, sees tremendous effect on your mental capacity. So not only your physical health, but it's actually great for your mental health. So if you could take those effects and put in a pill, it would be the best antidepressant ever. So exercise is also super important here. And then being in a social context, very important. I briefly mentioned that we're social creatures. Our brain is social. Our way to survive was belonging to a group. It's still up here, evolutionary. So we need to be in some kind of social context. This is also why the pandemic has been so tough on us, because it has really affected our social context. So being in a social setting is also something that really helps us manage our stress in a good way. And then taking short breaks throughout the day. I talked about the importance of breaking negative patterns. So once we get stressed, it's important to take a break. So often, when we feel that we really don't have time to take a break, that's when we should take a break. Just 5 minutes, do something else, walk around. Look at green stuff, walk in the woods. That's been shown to be super effective for the brain, because it's also evolutionary to us, because we know that when we were in an environment that had a lot of greenery, trees, etc., that's where we found shelter and nutrition. So there's so many old, ancient mechanisms that are still, controlling us. We think that we have our logical, super smart brain that can invent these kind of things and that make us think, etc. That is running the show, but it's really not. So these are the vitals we need to function as human beings. Mindfulness meditation is another factor that is super important. And some people might feel that meditation, it's kind of complex, I don't know how to do it. Well, there are a lot of apps for it, so it's really not that difficult. And it's when it's about mindfulness, you don't even need to meditate. So just try to be, one thing to be mindful is when you sit with a person at a dinner or meet a friend, put this away. That's one way to be mindful. And just focus on the person before you. And this shouldn't sound strange or weird, but today it is. And then direction, I talked about the importance of having goals. If we, for ourselves, have some kind of mental direction before us, that will help us get on in life. Because, okay, I'm actually going this way. So if I would just get in my car and drive somewhere, that would be kind of weird. It's the same with our life. Do we want to be in the passenger seat or the driver's seat of our lives? If we are looking at, okay, what needs to happen this week? What's important to me? What do I like doing? Where do I want to be at the end of this year? Try to formulate that kind of direction and break that down to, okay, what can I do about this? Which I will get into a little bit now. So my third boost is, how can we get stuff done? Because this is something that is stressing us as well. We often tend to procrastinate stuff. I don't know. Has any one of you ever had some kind of task that has been, it's been nagging you for the past 2-3 weeks and you're not doing it? And it's like, it's taking on a lot of your headspace. And when you did it, it took you 10 or 5 minutes to get out of the world. Has that ever happened? Yeah. Me too. I'm really good at that. So what I'm going to go through now are some steps you can take to actually avoid this. So I talked about the importance of goals, which creates some kind of comfort. If we have a direction, we know where we're heading and why, it's good for us because, like, Elon Musk is an example. He's very clear on that. And it looks like it works for him. I don't know. Tesla is now worth $1 trillion yesterday, I think. So having this kind of direction will not only make you more efficient and productive, it will also help you reduce stress. The key here is to connect with your long-term vision with small steps and what you do on a daily basis. So if you have any kind of goals or direction on what's important in your life, I don't know, does any one of you have a to-do list? Yeah. Would you consider those lists a must-do list or a want-to-do list? Must-do list, yes. So that's often what they are. I mean, they're great when it comes to general efficiency and productivity, but the issue with them is that they're not connected to our more long-term goals. So the key here is, look at your to-do list, which is a great way to have a structure on things that are important here and now. Connect them what's important in the long term. That's your goals. So if you can align your goals and just look at, okay, I have this long-term goal for the week or the month or the year, connect them to your to-do list. What will happen then is something magic. Because you will be talking to the prefrontal cortex of the brain, the direction it needs and wants to go, and with your normal daily behaviors. So that's how you create a connection with these two. Does that make sense? And when you're prioritizing stuff in your everyday and in your to-do list, use the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle. Really think about what is really important here. So often we end up getting stuck answering, responding to emails because it's a dopamine kick. Okay, did anything happen in the mailbox? I don't know if it has ever happened to you that you go back to the email to see if there's anything happening there? Anyone? Yeah? So this is typical because this is like heroin for our brain. Same with social media. We scroll, and then it's like, okay, I did this 5 minutes ago, and nothing has happened, but still I'm here again because we want that dopamine kick. And this has a tendency to override us and take over what we're doing. So we're doing those kind of things instead of things that are really important, like focusing on what really matters to us, or the work tasks we have that are a little bit more important. But if we just think about what's really important today, what will have the most impact on the things I'm doing and put them in your to-do list, that will help you to prioritize. And unfortunately, it's often doing the most boring thing first. I talked about procrastination, and often we tend to push the things that are, a bit difficult or tough to grasp. We push them ahead of us, so that they're there. They might be with us for weeks or months, and we don't take care of them. But they occupy our headspace. They create stress, anxiety. But if we just do them, they're out of our world. And the thing is not to think about it, it's just doing it. Because once we start thinking, we start rationalizing, and there's this battle of the brain that I told you earlier about. So when you're to do something, just start doing it many times. Like Nike says, just do it. That's the key, because you're smart people here, but when we start thinking, we tend to overthink and intellectualize things, and nothing happens, and we just like, oh, I need to do this before I can do that, blah, 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 blah. No, just do it. And last but not least, the very difficult part, do not multitask. So we know today that it takes the brain about 20 minutes, if we're distracted from something, it can take up to 20 minutes to get back to the task and be fully focused on it, the task we previously did. So we sit here, we might have Messenger, Snapchat, Instagram, Slack, whatever, and we're doing our work. Is it easy not to multitask today? Well, it's really not. I told you about, we have more productivity tools than ever to communicate, to be effective, etc. But productivity is going like this because we have all these tools and all these things distracting us. So, in this thing here, this computer, we have parallel processors. So it's designed to do many parallel processes at once. Our brain is unfortunately not designed at that. It's constantly switching between processes. So that's why we're not good at multitasking, doing several things at once. So if you really want to focus on a work task and do something, and you will be distracted, turn on flight mode and hide this thing here. Because it will be very, very tough to manage otherwise. And all these small things creates more stress and anxiety with us. And eventually when this adds up, it can lead to a burnout. But if we work proactively with ourselves, using these kind of steps, we will not only be more productive, but we will also reduce the likelihood of going into stress. And the last part I wanted to look into in terms of boosts is just to elaborate a little bit more on goal setting. So probably by now you know why goals can be really important to you. It's a mental thing. We need to have a direction. So how do I set good goals then? So there's a term called SMART goals. Has anyone here heard about that? Yeah, some of you. So it's a SMART abbreviation, right? So it stands for, if you set a goal, make it specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. So the problem and the issue when we set these goals and think about what's really important is it can be like, I want to run a marathon, or I want to lose weight, or something like that. So if we take the goal, I want to lose weight, is that a good goal? It's not specific. Is it measurable? Well, yeah, you can look at the weight, but it's not really that measurable. Is it attainable? Yeah, if you know what to do. Is it realistic? Is it time-bound? So if you don't connect these things, your goal will probably stress you more than help you. But if you define it and make it clear, for instance, by using the SMART goal process, it will help you to say, okay, I actually need to do these steps to let's say I want to run the Göteborgsvarvet, the half marathon here in Gothenburg. So, okay, so what would be a SMART goal then? Okay, so running the lap is good, so it's kind of specific, measurable. Will I be able to measure when it's done? Yeah, I've run it. Attainable? Yeah, I need to look at, when is this supposed to happen? Where am I right now? Is it realistic? So if I would come up with this idea about 1 week before the race, probably not that realistic. I also need to look at the time. So if I would start now, it's I think in May or whenever it might be. Okay, yeah. So what do I need to do until then? And then I should break that down into small steps, like maybe the first step. So what we've seen when it comes to habitual change, make the first steps if you want to adopt a new habit or a goal super easy. Like, okay, I'm gonna run the marathon. So the first thing could be I need to buy a pair of running shoes. As simple as that, because that will. It's easy. Most of us will probably be able to do it, or buy the ticket to the race. Because that will create a small dopamine kick that I can do this, I'm on the route, and that forces me positively towards my goal. If I would start to say, okay, I'm going to start run 20 kilometers today, and you haven't run anything prior to that, that would not be good. It would be too tough for you to overcome. So what we know today is that breaking down these steps is the key here. So what you need to do in these processes is that you need to be, first thing is that you need to be very patient. You need to be kind to yourself. Don't let, often we're ourselves our biggest critics. You also need to trick your mind. When I earlier talked about the battle of the brains, so we have an emotional part of the brain, and we have a logical part of the brain. So if I'm going to run this half marathon, I know what I'm supposed to do. I might not be doing it. So logically, our brain understands the long-term consequences of a certain behavior. Like, if I eat healthy, I will feel better in the long term, I will stay healthy. But emotionally, we cannot relate to long-term behaviors. Emotional, we're just here and now. That's why the craving to eat the chocolate here and now is so much stronger than the long-term consequences. To give an example, let's say this was a really hot plate, and I would put my hand here. I would get a painful sensation in my mind immediately to remove my hand. When it comes to our behaviors, we can have the same effect, but it's long term. So let's say if I would put my hand here, and in 30 days, I would get a painful sensation. I would not be able to relate to it. This is how the logical and emotional brain plays against each other in this case. So what we can do then is trick our minds. So let's say we have a little plan to run this half marathon. Okay, I bought my running shoes. That's a simple thing to trick my mind because it's kind of an easy thing to do that will help enforce me that I'm on the right path. And then what I should do is to give myself direct rewards because this speaks to the emotional part of the brain. So if I'm studying for an exam or have a work task that is really tough and I have difficulties getting the motivation to do this, connect direct rewards to it, because then you're not only speaking to the logical part of the brain that knows what you need to do, but also the emotional part that wants this instant gratification. So it's like, I'm going to do this exercise, I'm going to study now for 1 hour, and that allows me to watch one episode of Game of Thrones, for instance, where I get this dopamine kick. So then you've connected a direct reward to a long-term positive behavior. Does that make sense? So, in principle, that was what I wanted to go through with you guys today. I think you have been great. You've been doing some exercise. You've been challenging yourself mentally. You've managed to change your mind. You probably know now a few steps that can help you reduce stress. You know how to get stuff done, and you also have an idea on how to master motivation. And I think the key here is to really be kind to ourselves, understand that we have a brain that sometimes it's super smart and can do great things for us, but it's also really basic and stupid at times. And just knowing this helps us, and be kind to ourselves, because when we want to do things that are difficult, tough, adopt new behaviors or habits, it's a battle of the brains. Emotional brain versus a logical part of the brain. Just knowing this and be kind to yourself and knowing how the brain works, you can work with it instead of against it by rewarding it, tricking it, and have a long-term picture that you connect with what you do on an everyday basis. So that's what I wanted to share with you guys today, and hopefully it made some kind of sense. Thank you.